Today we're learning about the basics of shape layers using Adobe After Effects. Shape layers can be very powerful. This is a simple animation that I've created using only shape layers. You can see there's 2 shape layers and a mask. I'll make another video showing you how to make this one specifically. Let's go over the basics of what a shape layer is. I've made a new composition, just HDV, about 5 seconds long. I'm going to draw a simple rectangle with a rectangular. Now the first you'll notice is it's going to default to have a fill and a stroke. If you want to change the color of the fill, you just click on it, and of course the stroke. If you want there to be no fill, you have to click on the actual word fill, and you can tell it no. Of course, you could also tell it I would like a radial or a linear gradient or a solid. I'm going to tell it none. And same thing with stroke, and we could make stroke bigger or smaller. You can also add a gradient to a stroke. So that's the basics of what most people use a shape layer for. Let's look at what we have down here when we swirl this open. You have your basic transform that everything has, and then in contents, you can see it has created a rectangle. Here is the path of the rectangle. We can change the roundness of how round that rectangle is. The position is just literally where it is on the screen, and of course the size. Stroke is, of course, we've messed with the color already, the opacity, and the width. You're not really going to see anything with line cap until you have an actual line, but we can look at the joins. I'm going to zoom in on the corner so you can see the difference. That is a miter join, this is a round join, and a bevel join. You can also add dashes. And we can change the size of them. Now, the animation that I had at the beginning was simply an offset animation. Go ahead and turn on keyframes, and this just changed the offset, and you have a kind of interesting animation already without doing a whole lot of work. One of the main things to understand about transform when you're messing with shape layers is there are 2 different transforms. Think of you have a piece of paper and you drew this rectangle on it. If you want to transform the rectangle, you use this transform. If you want to transform the entire piece of paper, you're going to use this transform. So in general, I just use this transform. So that's going to move this around, and it's still going to leave the bounding box alone of the entire piece of paper, if that makes sense. So this is a shape composition that I made using a preset shape called a mandala that you can find in Effects and Presets. This is a complex shape. Instead of just being one rectangle, it actually has a group of shapes. Where you find these, so let me turn this one off and I'll grab a new one. Where you find these is in Effects and Presets, Animation Presets, Shapes, and then I'm going to go to the Sprites Still. And here are all of they're really pretty cool. There's gears, the daisies, fan blades. The one that I used in this one was mandala. And I will say everybody is used to the mandalas having that color, and so I would always change the color up here in fill once again, just so they don't look like every mandala ever. So what I did to this one, let's go ahead and I'm going to delete the one that I had. What I did to this one is I went ahead and went into the contents, and like I said, it's an entire group of shapes. So we have a polystar, all this transform and fill. I'm going to go ahead and make this just a tad bigger. Once again, I'm using this transform, not this transform. Just a little bit bigger so we can see it. So one of the fun things to animate with these is the amount of points. So you can see what happens when I change the amount of points. So I'm just going to keyframe starting with 9 and going to, say, 30. And when you hit play, that's pretty cool animation already. That's a pretty cool animation already. But you will notice that at the end it doesn't loop, it just goes right back. If we wanted it to loop, that's actually pretty simple. I'm going to move that keyframe that we made to the middle, and then click on our original keyframe, Control-C, Control-V, paste. So now we have the exact same keyframe at the beginning and the end, so that it will perfectly loop. So it's going to go to the middle, then go back, and start over again. So we've got a good loop. The next thing I like to animate is the inner radius. Let me show you what it does. Pretty cool. So, and just to let you know, this is the outer radius. Reset that. I'm going to animate the inner radius. So it's going to start like that. Maybe it'll do something fun like that. And then, like I said, I want it to go back to where it was so that we have a complete. And then I want it to go back to where it was so we have a loop. Control C, Control V. And just for fun, let's go ahead and do an outer radius while we're at it. Why not? So if you've messed around with that and made something good, let's try and do something kind of like this. If we have 3 of them and we let them play through all at one time, we get something pretty cool like this. So I'm going to go back to my original and let's try and make something kind of like this. And we're going to move that to the right. Control D, P for position, move that to the left. I did go ahead and scale these up a little bit so we could see them better. Now this looks great, but I want to change things so that we could see through them a little bit. So I want to deal with the modes. If you do not see your blending modes, just hover over the name of your composition, right click and go to columns and make sure modes is turned on. They are right here. These are the different blending modes. So if you click on them, you can see all the different ones. I'm going to go ahead and try multiply. You see the difference between this one and this one with multiply on. I'm going to just stop it so we can kind of try some of them. Exclusion is kind of fun. If you would like to cycle through these while it's playing, Shift and the plus and minus buttons that are on your keyboard right above the P, those will cycle through all of the different types of blending modes. There's hard mix, pen light. Some of them don't do as much as others. I think I like the way hard light looks. I'm going to go ahead and change the second one to be on hard light. So you can see how blending modes could really help this. Of course, we can also put a blur on it and make these look all wishy-washy. There's a lot of really cool things you can do with just a simple mandala shape layer. On this one, I did use the exclusion mode. So exclusion's one you might want to try. The next thing I want to show you is the use of repeaters. So this right here is something called repeaters. I'm going to go ahead, So I'm going to go ahead and make a new composition, about 5 seconds. And we'll go ahead and use flower power for this one. And I'm going to do just a simple rotation. Remember, do not use this transform. We're going to use the transform that's within contents. So it's just going to sit here and rotate. Very simple little animation. But what I want to do is click right here to this add, and I'm going to add a repeater. And you can kind of already figure out what it does. So let's make a simple animation. Turning on keyframing, we're going to start with 1. By the time it gets to the end, we'll be at, say, 10. And let's see what happens. There you go. But what else can we do to that? Offset is kind of cool. If you wanted it to kind of fly across the screen, that's the offset of where this repetition is happening. You could also have it go above. Did you see it flip to being above or below? What I like to do is change the scale of it as it repeats. So I think that's a kind of cool effect. You can also have it rotating even more. You could have it start with opacity, and you could have it then go back to ending opacity. Anchor point is going to change where it is. So if we really change that anchor point enough, you can have a complete circle if you do this right. These, you've just got to sit here and mess with repeaters. You can create all kind of things with repeaters. Now, the last thing I wanted us to look at is using lines. Those are shapes too, and we can taper them, as you can see with this. I made some grass, so let's talk about how I did that. So create a new composition, 5 seconds, and we're going to grab the pen tool. Just click once somewhere outside of your composition, then click and drag. And you'll create kind of a swoosh like that. Now, obviously, we do not need the fill, so click on the word fill and turn off your fill. And we need our stroke to be green because we're making grass. Choose a crazy green. And let's go look at the choices we have on this particular shape layer. So in our stroke, I had said you weren't going to be able to tell what this looks like until we got to a line. So right here you can see the difference between butt cap or round cap. So I think round cap is what we need to use here. And then we're going to go down and taper. So the one that you need to change is the end length. When you look at that, if you want it to be a little bit thicker of a grass, you just need to go change the actual stroke width itself. Now we have some grass. And that looks pretty cool, but we need to make it animate on. So we're going to go back to where we added the repeater, and we're going to add an animator. This time we're going to add trim paths. So basically this is going to kind of create a mask over what we did. If you mess with the start, you can see it's actually going to go the opposite direction of what we need. So end is what we're going to need. So that is what we're going to animate. So think about it. When it starts, you want it to be at 0, and when it ends, you want it to be at 100. So let's go ahead and turn on keyframing. It's going to start. And once again, I'm in the end attribute. Let's see how that works. Not bad. So the way that I created that is to make some copies. Control D. Then I clicked P and moved it over some. Now I want the timing to be a little bit different. All you have to do is just pick that up and move it so it starts just a little bit later. All right, let's make another copy, Control D. But this time I'm going to kind of put it over here, and I want to flip it the other way. Easiest way to do that is to just grab right here and flip it. And this is grass, so it can be fluid. It doesn't have to be perfect. And we're once again going to vary where this starts, the timing, so that they'll be a little bit off. Pretty cool. Now you can highlight everything, Control A, and then Control D to make copies of all of them at one time. And they're still selected, so we can move them all at the same time. Move them over a little bit. There we go. And I think some of them I want to be a little bit shorter. You, of course, could scale them so that they have some variety. And I changed all the blending modes to multiply. So Control A to select all, and then you can just change them to multiply. So when they overlap each other, they'll get that cool effect. I think I want to make even more. So what would be good is if we could nest all of this down and then just make a copy of all of them at one time. In After Effects, that is called pre-composition. So we're going to select them all, Control A, go up to Layer and say Pre-compose. This is like nesting that we have in Premiere. So I'm going to call this Grass Nest. And it has put all of those layers down into one. I can now say Control D, and I'll move that entire nest over. Let's do it one more time so we have some pretty thick grass. Now the last thing I want to do is I'm not seeing the multiply effect on some of these, and that's because the nest itself needs to have the modes changed. Let's go change the nests to multiply. There we go. We've created some grass just by drawing some simple lines. And you may have noticed there's also one called Wave, if you want to make your grass look more kind of like leaves. I think the most interesting thing to keyframe is the phase, but you have to kind of mess around with this to see what you think. I think I'd also add a taper. So this one has both a taper and the wave. And like I said, if you start messing around with the wave, I like to animate the phase of the wave. But you can animate whatever you want. That looks pretty cool. So you've got taper, wave, dashes. Oh, we can put some dashes on there too if we want. Oh my goodness. Yeah. That is very cool. So that's the basics of shape layers. Of course, there's a lot more to it than this. There are lots and lots of sprites you can use, but this is a jumping off place of where you can start really exploring shape layers.